Nearly 4 decades have passed since audiences first watched a shy teenager named Baby fall for a rebellious dance instructor at a summer resort. And yet Dirty Dancing still refuses to let go of us. It turned two relatively unknown performers into household names, gave us one of the most quoted lines in film history, and became the kind of movie people watch every single summer without ever getting tired of it. But here's something most fans never learned. This beloved classic almost didn't survive its own production. Behind that glowing, nostalgic surface was a set plagued by arguments, injuries, brutal weather, and a studio that nearly buried the whole project before anyone ever got to see it. Today we're pulling back the curtain on the moments nobody talks about, the scenes that weren't supposed to happen, the stars who almost weren't stars at all, and the secrets that shaped one of the most iconic romances ever put on film. Believe it or not, the very name of the film almost sank it before a single ticket was sold. In the late 1980s, censors were far stricter about anything that even hinted at scandal, and the phrase Dirty Dancing set off alarm bells the moment it crossed a border. Screenwriter Eleanor Bergstein, who based much of the story on her own adolescence, later explained that customs officials reviewing the footage assumed they were dealing with adult material simply because of the title, and held up the reels while they investigated. Even after the studio decided to keep the name, one of the film's own stars couldn't stand it. Patrick Swayze was open about his dislike for the title in interviews around the film's release, insisting he had pushed to have it changed to something he felt better represented the story. The studio, however, wasn't budging, and looking back, audiences should probably be grateful, because the leading alternative on the table was reportedly something close to I Was a Teenage Mambo Queen. It's hard to imagine that title aging quite as gracefully. Casting decisions can make or break a film, and Dirty Dancing came remarkably close to looking completely different. Before Patrick Swayze ever set foot on set as Johnny Castle, the studio floated names like Val Kilmer and Benicio del Toro for the role. At one point, production had actually moved forward with a different actor cast as Johnny, only for the filmmakers to realize partway through shooting that the chemistry with their leading lady simply wasn't there. That miscasting opened the door for Swayze, whose background in classical ballet training made him uniquely suited to the physical demands of the role, even though, as we'll get into later, his body was already fighting him behind the scenes. Jennifer Grey's casting as Baby wasn't a sure thing either. Other young actresses were in serious contention for the part before Grey won the role, and by her own account, she was paid a surprisingly modest fee for a movie that would go on to define her career. What's especially interesting is that Grey and Swayze had already worked together once before on an entirely different film, and that prior experience did not exactly translate into instant comfort. Grey has said in later interviews that despite having shared a set with Swayze previously, she felt genuinely nervous stepping into a role that required so much physical trust with him, especially given that he was a trained dancer and she wasn't. Some of the most beloved moments audiences associate with Dirty Dancing were never written into any script at all. Take the now famous rehearsal montage, where Johnny is trying to teach Baby the choreography and ends up running his fingers along her arm. What looks like a perfectly staged flirtation was actually born from a genuine accident. Grey was ticklish, she couldn't stop laughing, and Swayze's visible irritation on camera was completely real rather than acted. According to producer Linda Gottlieb, the crew had actually moved on from that footage entirely, having gone back and res-hot the scene properly once Grey composed herself. It wasn't until editors were combing through raw footage later that they rediscovered the clip, watched it, and realized it was funnier and more charming than the version they'd planned to use. When they showed it to the two stars, both of them reportedly burst out laughing too, partly because they had completely forgotten the moment had even been filmed. A similarly unscripted moment happened during what became one of the film's tenderest scenes, set to the song Love is Strange. The two actors were simply rehearsing, unaware that cameras were rolling, and their natural, playful interaction ended up being exactly the kind of authentic chemistry that no amount of scripting could have manufactured. Moments like these are a reminder that some of the most memorable parts of beloved films happen entirely by accident, and that a film's editors often deserve just as much credit as its writers. If you rewatch Dirty Dancing, everything about it screams warm summer nights, golden lighting, green grass, a lake that looks perfectly inviting. What audiences never see is that filming actually got pushed well into autumn, forcing the crew to fake an entire season. Crew members reportedly spray-painted dying leaves and grass green just to preserve the illusion of summer on camera. It worked visually, but it created a miserable reality for the cast. The lake sequences, including the now iconic lift, were filmed when the water had dropped to a bone-chilling temperature. Jennifer Grey has since admitted the water was almost unbearably cold, and that she only got through it because she was young, determined, and desperate to make the most of a big opportunity. Swayze described the lake in similarly harsh terms in his own memoir, calling the experience one of the most physically punishing parts of the shoot. Despite the discomfort, the two of them reportedly made a deliberate choice to save the emotionally significant lift for the very end of filming, wanting to make sure it landed exactly right after weeks of preparation. And the cold wasn't the only environmental extreme working against them. Ironically, other portions of filming were shot during brutally hot conditions, with outdoor temperatures climbing into the triple digits and studio lighting pushing things even further indoors. Cast and crew members reportedly fainted during particularly grueling days of shooting, and at least one veteran actress had to be hospitalized for dehydration. It's a strange contrast. A film that looks effortlessly breezy on screen was, in reality, shot through both dangerous heat and dangerous cold within the span of just a few weeks. Here's something that might surprise longtime fans. The undeniable chemistry between Johnny and Baby didn't come from a smooth working relationship between Swayze and Grey. The two had actually crossed paths years earlier on a different film project, and by most accounts, that experience left some friction between them that carried forward. On the set of Dirty Dancing, their different approaches to acting reportedly clashed more than once. Grey has described herself as more emotionally driven, someone who could be moved to tears by criticism, while also prone to fits of laughter that occasionally derail takes. Swayze, by contrast, approached the work with a fearless, physical intensity, throwing himself into stunts and choreography without hesitation. Grey later reflected that this contrast, her caution against his fearlessness, created a strange kind of dynamic that, whether they intended it or not, ended up mirroring the push and pull between their characters on screen. Despite the tension, both actors reportedly delivered such a strong chemistry read during casting that producers had no doubts about pairing them, and crew members who worked closely with the pair have described their relationship as intense in both directions, sometimes contentious, sometimes deeply affectionate, but never boring. It's a case where off-screen friction may have actually sharpened, rather than hurt, the performances audiences ended up falling in love with. It's easy to assume a film this beloved was recognized as special from day one, but the truth is almost the opposite. Dirty Dancing was made on a shoestring budget of roughly $6 million, a modest sum even by the standards of the era, and the script had reportedly been turned down dozens of times before a small studio finally agreed to take a chance on it. Once filming wrapped, the reception internally was lukewarm at best. Early test screenings left executives nervous, and one telling detail stands out. A significant portion of test audiences didn't even register that the story involved a subplot about abortion, one of the more socially charged elements woven into the script. Reactions from the people financing the film were reportedly so negative that at least one executive suggested it might be smarter to destroy the footage and collect on the production's insurance rather than release it at all. A planned marketing partnership also fell apart when a corporate sponsor objected to the film's more mature themes and asked for changes the filmmakers refused to make, leaving the studio to promote the movie largely on its own. The original plan was to release it in theaters only briefly before shifting it to home video, a distribution channel the studio was actually more experienced with. None of that hesitation ended up mattering. The film went on to earn well over $200 million at the box office, an astronomical return relative to its budget, and it later won an Academy Award for its now legendary theme song. Producers who lived through the anxious lead-up to release have since spoken candidly about just how close the film came to being shelved entirely, which makes its eventual cultural staying power all the more remarkable. Behind Swayze's effortless, athletic performance was a body that was quietly falling apart. Long before Dirty Dancing, A serious leg injury from his teenage years had already caused lasting damage to his knee, and years later a severe infection in that same leg had put him at risk of amputation entirely. He recovered, but the underlying damage never fully went away, and by the time production began, he was reportedly dancing on cartilage that had all but worn through. The physically demanding choreography, combined with a shooting schedule of just over 6 weeks, pushed that injury to its limits. Repeated falls during certain balance-heavy sequences caused his knee to swell so severely that fluid had to be drained from it during production. Lifting his co-star in water, even though she weighed relatively little, added enormous strain given the resistance of moving through a lake. None of that pain is visible in the finished film, which says a great deal about the discipline and professionalism Swayze brought to a role he was, by all accounts, working through real physical agony to deliver. The years following Dirty Dancing weren't easy for its leading lady either. Not long before the film's premiere, Grey was involved in a serious car accident that resulted in 2 fatalities and left her then-boyfriend with significant injuries, a tragedy that overshadowed what should have been one of the most triumphant moments of her career. Years later, she made the decision to undergo rhinoplasty, a choice that ended up requiring a corrective second surgery and ultimately altered her appearance dramatically enough that even people close to her had trouble recognizing her afterward. Grey has spoken candidly in the years since about how disorienting that period was, describing it as something that reshaped both her identity and her career trajectory in ways she never anticipated. She said she even considered changing her name entirely and starting over under a different identity rather than continuing to navigate an industry that reacted so strongly to her new appearance. Rather than retreat, she eventually chose to face the fallout directly and later wrote about the experience in her memoir, reflecting on it as one of the most defining periods of her life, painful, but ultimately clarifying. For years, fans have wondered why a film this successful never got a proper follow-up, and it turns out plans have quietly been in motion. Jennifer Grey has confirmed she'll return to produce and star in a new installment, revisiting her character decades later. Progress has been slow, complicated by industry-wide production delays, and the timeline has shifted more than once. Since Swayze is obviously unable to return, reports indicate the filmmakers are working to honor his character's legacy within the story rather than recast the role outright, and there have reportedly been conversations with his estate about how to handle that involvement respectfully. His widow has publicly expressed some hesitation about the project, noting that Swayze himself had turned down sequel ideas during his lifetime, feeling the original story didn't need a continuation. Public reaction to the news has been mixed. Plenty of longtime fans agree with Swayze's original instinct that the story ended exactly where it should have, while others are eager to see where a new chapter might take these characters. Either way, the fact that a single low-budget summer romance from the 1980s still generates this much conversation decades later says everything about the market left. Looking back at everything that happened during production, the studio nearly shelving it, the freezing lake, the punishing heat, the injuries, the tension between its 2 leads, and the personal battles both stars fought long after the cameras stopped rolling. It's almost hard to believe Dirty Dancing became the phenomenon it did. And yet maybe that's exactly why it worked. The imperfections, the accidents, the real frustration, and real vulnerability that leaked onto film despite everyone's best efforts to control it are part of what makes the final product feel so genuine decades later. It's a reminder that the movies we love most rarely come together as smoothly as they appear on screen. Somewhere behind almost every iconic scene is a story about how close it came to never happening at all. What surprised you most? Let us know in the comments which of these behind-the-scenes stories you didn't know about, and if you think we missed one, tell us. We might cover it next time.